It was an ordinary night, like so many others. The protagonist, Ethan, a young man fascinated by conspiracy theories and internet mysteries, was deep in an obscure online forum. Among forgotten threads and low-viewed videos, a title caught his attention: Necrosleep, the video you should never watch. The intriguing title came with ominous warnings. Accounts spoke of people who were never seen again, of inexplicable disappearances, and of dreams that felt more real than life itself. Intrigued and skeptical, Ethan clicked the link without hesitation. The video began with a black screen and barely audible whispering sounds. Hypnotic geometric patterns emerged on the screen, shifting at a frequency that seemed to invade his mind. There was something unsettling about it, yet he couldn't look away. Suddenly, a phrase flashed on the screen: "Are you ready to truly wake up?" He chuckled softly, dismissing it as another cheap viral marketing gimmick. After watching, Ethan felt nothing extraordinary, at least not at first. However, that same night, he had a disturbing dream. In the dream, he found himself in a place that defied logic. The ground was made of a translucent material, reflecting shadows with no apparent source. The sky constantly shifted colors, hues that didn't exist in the real world. Footsteps echoed in the distance, yet he saw nothing beyond a dense fog that seemed to whisper his name. When he woke up, Ethan was drenched in sweat. Looking in the mirror, he noticed something unusual: red marks on his arms, as if someone had grabbed him while he slept. He spent the day trying to forget what had happened, but the feeling of being watched never left him. The shadows in his home seemed deeper, and the ambient sounds, louder. Curiosity, however, was stronger than fear. Ethan decided to watch the video again. He wanted to understand what was so special about that file that made him feel this way. As he hit play for the second time, he noticed details he hadn't before. In the background of the geometric patterns, dark figures moved. They weren't clear, but they were there, humanoid shapes that seemed to be watching him through the screen. The video ended with a low sound that made his heart race. That night, Ethan dreamed again, but this time, the dream didn't feel like a dream. He was back in that place, but now, the environment was more defined. Grotesque towers seemed to grow from the ground, like bones breaking through the earth's flesh. A voice echoed, deep and distant: "Welcome to the nightmare realm. From now on, your fears belong to me." Ethan woke abruptly, gasping for air. But something was different. He felt a presence in his room, something he couldn't see but knew was there. In the corner of his mind, a voice whispered, "You cannot escape. Watch again." Ethan's world had begun to unravel. Each time he closed his eyes, the nightmare realm consumed him more fully. Sleep no longer offered rest, it became a portal he couldn't control. This time, he woke up not in his bed but standing on the cold, translucent ground of that surreal world. His breath fogged in the air, though there was no wind, no warmth, no life. The grotesque towers loomed closer than before, their jagged forms pulsating as if alive. The ground beneath his feet glowed faintly, casting eerie shadows that moved independently of any light source. Ethan's senses were heightened, the faint sound of whispers carried on an invisible breeze, and a distant, rhythmic thudding echoed through the landscape. It was as if the world itself had a heartbeat. As he took a cautious step forward, the fog began to part, revealing shapes that moved just out of focus. They were humanoid but distorted, their limbs elongated and their faces obscured by shifting shadows. One of them stopped and turned directly toward Ethan. Its head tilted unnaturally, and a guttural sound escaped its throat, like a low growl mixed with static. A sudden voice cut through the oppressive silence: "Ethan, you've come back." The voice belonged to the Watcher, though Ethan couldn't see its source. It resonated everywhere at once, deep and commanding. "Each time you return, you bring me closer to freedom. But you must prove your worth. Face your fear, or remain here forever." Before Ethan could respond, the ground beneath him cracked, and he plummeted into darkness. He landed in a labyrinth of mirrors, each one reflecting not his image but fragmented scenes of his life. Memories twisted into nightmares, his childhood home consumed by fire, loved ones calling his name but vanishing into shadows. As he moved through the maze, he realized the mirrors weren't just reflecting his fears, they were pulling him into them. Desperation gripped him. Ethan shouted into the void, demanding answers. "Why are you doing this? What do you want from me?" The Watcher's voice echoed again, cold and emotionless. "Fear is the purest form of energy. You are my vessel, Ethan. Bring me others, and I may grant you freedom. Fail, and you'll remain here, feeding me, for eternity." Ethan's mind raced. He couldn't bring himself to trap someone else in this nightmare, but the alternative was unthinkable. As he hesitated, the labyrinth began to collapse, the mirrors shattering one by one. Each shard released a shadowy figure, their eyes glowing with malice as they closed in on him. Ethan screamed, his voice drowned out by the cacophony of breaking glass and guttural growls. He closed his eyes, bracing for the end, and woke up in his bed, drenched in sweat once more. But this time, the red marks on his arms were deeper, almost like burns. The Watcher's final words lingered in his mind, "You cannot escape. Bring me more." Ethan's life had become an agonizing blur. Each day, he clung to a fragile thread of normalcy, only to be dragged back into the nightmare realm whenever sleep overtook him. He stopped confiding in friends, fearing they would think he'd lost his mind. But one evening, as he sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, he realized he wasn't alone. The shadows in the corners of his room seemed to shift, and faint whispers filled the air, too quiet to understand but impossible to ignore. Determined to fight back, Ethan sought answers. He returned to the forum where he had first found Necrosleep, scouring through every comment, every cryptic message. A pattern began to emerge. The video wasn't just a random file, it was part of a dark ritual. Those who watched it unknowingly opened themselves to the Watcher, offering their minds as vessels for fear. One thread, buried among the rest, claimed there was a way to sever the connection, but it required returning to the nightmare realm willingly. Ethan hesitated, knowing the risk. The forum user who posted the instructions had described a ritual involving candles, mirrors, and the video itself. Ethan prepared everything as instructed, lighting the candles and positioning the mirrors in a circle. He sat in the center, clutching his phone as Necrosleep played once again. The geometric patterns seemed more vivid this time, their colors burning into his retinas. As the video ended, the room darkened, and he felt a sudden pull, as if his very soul was being dragged from his body. He awoke in the nightmare realm, but this time, something had changed. The world felt denser, the air heavy with an oppressive energy. The towers were closer, their surfaces rippling like liquid obsidian. The whispers were louder, and the shapes in the fog had become bolder, their features grotesque and unnervingly human. Ethan's heartbeat thundered in his ears as he took a step forward, feeling the ground shift beneath him like quicksand. A figure emerged from the fog, tall and cloaked in shadows. Its face was obscured, but its eyes burned like twin suns. The Watcher had come. "You return willingly," it said, its voice a mixture of a growl and a hiss. "But freedom is not yours to claim." Ethan clenched his fists, his fear momentarily giving way to anger. "You've taken everything from me. If I'm going to suffer, I'll make sure you do too." The Watcher laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the realm. Bold words for a mortal. "But fear not, Ethan. You'll have your chance to fight. The question is, will you survive?" Ethan stood frozen before the Watcher, his fists clenched, heart pounding. The oppressive air of the nightmare realm seemed to press down on him, sapping his strength, but he refused to yield. The Watcher's towering form loomed, its shifting shadows revealing glimpses of horrifying, unidentifiable shapes. "Do you truly think you can resist me, mortal?" The voice echoed like thunder, vibrating through Ethan's very core. Determined, Ethan faced the entity. "You might feed on fear, but I've got nothing left to lose." His voice wavered, betraying his courage, but he pressed on. The Watcher's laughter reverberated around the realm, and with a wave of its hand, the ground beneath Ethan shifted, forming into a grotesque arena surrounded by shadowy spectators. Their hollow, glowing eyes fixated on him, each pair dripping malice. "You've chosen to fight," the Watcher hissed. "But your challenge is not with me, yet." From the arena's edges, the fog thickened and coalesced into monstrous figures. Each one represented Ethan's deepest fears: a towering mass of writhing snakes, a grotesque shadow resembling his deceased father, and a shifting, faceless mass that emitted an ear-splitting wail. Ethan felt a surge of panic, but then remembered the mirrors from the labyrinth. He realized the shadows were manifestations of his fear. If he gave in, they would overwhelm him. Gritting his teeth, he charged toward the first creature. As he swung wildly, his fists passed through its form, which dissolved momentarily before reforming. The Watcher's voice taunted, "Fear cannot be defeated through force, mortal. You must face it head-on." Desperation took over as the creatures closed in. Ethan tried to focus, breathing deeply despite the suffocating atmosphere. He turned to the snake-like creature, forcing himself to look it in the eyes. Memories of his childhood phobia surged forward, but he didn't flinch. The creature hissed, its form shuddering before disintegrating into mist. Encouraged, Ethan turned to the other manifestations, confronting the emotions they represented: guilt, grief, and regret. As the last creature dissolved, the arena grew silent. The Watcher stepped forward, its voice tinged with amusement. "You've proven resilient, but this is far from over. Freedom comes at a cost, Ethan. Are you willing to pay it?" The ground beneath Ethan shifted again, and he found himself in a vast, empty space, the oppressive fog gone. In the distance, he saw a shimmering portal. It pulsed with an otherworldly energy, and he knew instinctively it was the way out. But as he stepped toward it, the Watcher's voice rang out. "You may leave, but you must make a choice. For every step you take closer to freedom, I will claim another soul in your world." Ethan hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing on him. He turned back to face the Watcher, his resolve hardening. "I won't let you use me to hurt others," he said, his voice steady. The Watcher's laughter boomed once more, and the chapter ended as Ethan prepared to make his ultimate stand. Ethan stood before the Watcher, his resolve wavering under the sheer weight of its presence. Shadows rippled off the entity like waves, distorting the space around them. The air in the nightmare realm grew colder, and the oppressive silence amplified Ethan's shallow breaths. The Watcher gestured toward the shifting ground, which began to crack and morph, forming a dark arena surrounded by faintly glowing figures. Their hollow eyes gleamed, watching him with unnerving focus. "You crave freedom, yet fear binds you still," the Watcher hissed, its voice like grinding stone. "Prove yourself worthy, Ethan. Face the darkness within." The arena began to fill with grotesque shapes, creatures birthed from Ethan's most primal fears. The first emerged as a towering beast, its skin a patchwork of pulsing veins and jagged scars. It had the face of someone he once loved, twisted into a cruel, mocking expression. Ethan stumbled backward, his mind screaming to retreat, but he knew escape was impossible. The Watcher had forced him to confront not only his fears but the guilt and regret he had buried deep within. The beast lunged, its claws slashing through the thick air. Ethan ducked, narrowly avoiding the attack. "This isn't real," he whispered to himself, trying to steady his shaking hands. "It's just a trick." But the pain in his leg as the creature's claws grazed him said otherwise. Blood trickled down, warm and sticky. The nightmare realm didn't obey the rules of dreams. It blurred the line between illusion and reality. As he fought, Ethan began to notice patterns in the creature's movements. They hesitated when he stood his ground, their attacks faltering when he refused to yield to fear. His mind raced as he pieced it together. Fear was their strength, but also their weakness. Summoning every ounce of courage, Ethan steadied himself, locking eyes with the beast. "I'm not afraid of you," he said, his voice trembling but growing firmer. The creature faltered, its form flickering like a glitch in a video. Sensing an opportunity, Ethan took a step forward, his fear replaced by anger. "You're nothing but a shadow," he growled. The beast roared, but its strength waned with each step Ethan took toward it. Finally, it dissolved into black mist, the air around him growing still. Ethan turned to face the next figure, a distorted version of himself, clad in tattered clothes and wearing a malevolent grin. "You can't escape," it sneered, mimicking his voice. "You'll fail, just like before." The words cut deeper than he expected, but Ethan clenched his fists, refusing to back down. One by one, the creatures fell as Ethan confronted his inner demons, the guilt of lost opportunities, the shame of past mistakes, and the paralyzing fear of an uncertain future. Each victory came at a cost, leaving him more battered and weary. Yet, with every shadow he defeated, the oppressive weight in the air lightened, and the glowing figures in the arena began to dim. Finally, Ethan stood alone, his chest heaving. The Watcher loomed above, silent and unmoving. "You've done well, mortal," it said, its voice laced with amusement. "But this was merely the beginning. Freedom demands sacrifice, and your trial is far from over." The arena dissolved, and Ethan found himself back on the translucent ground, the towers looming in the distance. A shimmering portal appeared before him, pulsating with an otherworldly light. He knew instinctively that it led back to his world, but the price of using it remained unclear. The Watcher's voice echoed in his mind, cold and final. "Take one step toward the portal, and I will claim a soul from your world for each breath you take. Choose wisely, Ethan. Your freedom will cost more than you can imagine." Ethan froze, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The portal shimmered, so close yet impossibly far. Could he doom others to save himself? Or would he stay and face whatever final challenge the Watcher had in store? His hands shook as he looked between the portal and the towering figure of the Watcher, knowing that the next choice would define his fate. Ethan stood frozen, the shimmering portal before him offering the promise of escape. The Watcher's towering silhouette loomed behind him, its voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Decide, mortal. Your world or theirs. Each step toward the portal will bind another to me." The translucent ground beneath Ethan's feet began to ripple, displaying shifting images of strangers, faces he didn't recognize but whose fates now rested on his decision. He clenched his fists, anger and despair warring within him. He had no reason to trust the Watcher, yet the promise of freedom dangled temptingly before him, just out of reach. The whispers of the nightmare realm grew louder, morphing into voices that sounded eerily like his own thoughts. "What's one life compared to yours? You didn't ask for this. No one would blame you." But as Ethan glanced at the portal, he saw not just escape but the reflection of his growing guilt. The weight of the choice pressed down on him like an invisible hand. The Watcher sensed his hesitation and laughed, a deep, resonating sound that shook the air. "Ah, you humans. Always so burdened by morality. But remember, Ethan, fear is not only your prison, it is also your weapon. Use it wisely, and you may yet survive." Ethan's eyes flicked to the shadowy figures still moving in the fog. They seemed more distinct now, their grotesque shapes morphing into forms that resembled people he once knew, his parents, a childhood friend, even his younger self. Each one carried an expression of anguish, their mouths silently screaming. "This isn't real," he told himself, but the line between illusion and reality had long since blurred. In a moment of defiance, Ethan turned away from the portal and faced the Watcher. "If you want fear, then take mine. But I won't trade lives for my freedom." The words tasted bitter, but they ignited a spark of determination. He wouldn't play by the Watcher's rules. The Watcher paused, its glowing eyes narrowing. "Very well, mortal. You've chosen sacrifice. But know this, courage does not shield you from suffering. Let the trial begin." The ground beneath Ethan cracked and split, and he fell once more into darkness. This time, he landed in a desolate wasteland, where the very air seemed to vibrate with tension. Monolithic figures towered in the distance, their hollow eyes watching his every move. A voice echoed in his mind, guiding him forward. "To defeat fear, you must embrace it." Ethan walked, his steps heavy but resolute. The wasteland tested him with memories twisted into horrors, his greatest failures amplified, his deepest insecurities laid bare. At every turn, the Watcher's voice taunted him. "Why fight when you know you cannot win?" But something within Ethan shifted. With each trial, he began to see through the illusions. The twisted memories and monstrous figures were nothing more than projections of his own mind, weapons wielded by the Watcher to break him. Instead of running, Ethan confronted them, forcing himself to face his fears head-on. Finally, he reached the heart of the wasteland, where a massive mirror stood, its surface rippling like liquid silver. Ethan's reflection stared back at him, but it was warped, a version of himself consumed by fear, anger, and regret. The reflection stepped out of the mirror, solidifying into a tangible form. It grinned maliciously, wielding a blade made of jagged shadows. "You can't defeat me," the reflection sneered. "I am you." The battle was brutal, each strike of the shadow blade cutting deeper into Ethan's psyche. But with every wound, Ethan fought harder, drawing strength from the knowledge that he had faced these fears before and survived. He wrestled the blade from his reflection's grasp and plunged it into the ground, shattering the illusion. As the wasteland dissolved around him, Ethan stood alone once more, battered but unbroken. The Watcher appeared, its form flickering as if weakened. "You have proven yourself, mortal. But know this, fear is eternal. It cannot be destroyed, only contained." A new portal opened, its light warm and inviting. Ethan hesitated, glancing back at the Watcher. "I'll leave," he said, "but I won't forget. I'll find a way to destroy you." The Watcher's laughter echoed as Ethan stepped through the portal, returning to the real world. He awoke in his bed, the video file deleted from his computer, the marks on his arms faded. The nightmare realm was behind him, but its shadow lingered in his mind. Ethan knew his journey wasn't over, it was only the beginning. The Watcher raised its hand, and the ground beneath Ethan trembled violently. Cracks formed in the translucent surface, spreading outward in jagged lines that glowed with an ominous red light. The fog thickened, enveloping Ethan as he stumbled backward. His instincts screamed at him to run, but there was nowhere to go. The Watcher's voice boomed through the haze, "Step forward, mortal. Face the trial or become another shadow in my domain." Ethan's breath quickened as the fog cleared slightly, revealing a circular arena. The walls were formed of writhing black tendrils that seemed alive, constantly shifting and reaching out like grasping hands. At the center of the arena stood a figure that looked disturbingly familiar. It was Ethan himself. Or rather, a twisted version of him. This doppelganger grinned wickedly, its eyes voids of endless darkness. Its hands clutched a jagged weapon, a blade forged from the shattered mirrors of the labyrinth. "You must conquer yourself," the Watcher declared. "Only then will you understand the nature of fear." Ethan's doppelganger lunged without warning, the blade slicing through the air with terrifying speed. Ethan barely dodged, stumbling over the uneven ground. The doppelganger laughed, its voice a distorted echo of Ethan's own. You can't win. I am every fear you've ever had, every regret you've ever buried. I know you better than you know yourself." The words cut deeper than the blade ever could. The fight wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Every strike, every taunt from the doppelganger brought Ethan's darkest memories to the surface. He saw flashes of moments he tried to forget, failures, betrayals, the faces of people he had lost. The arena itself seemed to react to his despair, the walls closing in and the tendrils growing more aggressive. But then, something shifted. As Ethan dodged another attack, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the blade. It wasn't twisted or distorted, it was him, as he truly was. In that moment, he realized that the doppelganger wasn't invincible. It thrived on his fear, but fear was a double-edged sword. It could paralyze, but it could also fuel resolve. "I'm not afraid of you," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. He stood his ground as the doppelganger lunged again, this time catching the blade with his hands. Pain seared through him, but he held firm, staring into the voids where his double's eyes should have been. "You're just a part of me. You don't control me." The doppelganger hesitated, its form flickering as if it were struggling to maintain its shape. Ethan seized the opportunity, wrenching the blade from its grasp and driving it into the ground. The arena erupted in a blinding light, and the doppelganger let out an ear-piercing scream as it dissolved into nothingness. The light faded, and Ethan found himself alone in the arena. The Watcher's voice returned, softer but no less menacing. "You've passed the first trial. But know this, mortal, fear is not so easily vanquished. Your journey is far from over." A portal appeared before Ethan, swirling with the same hypnotic patterns as the Necrosleep video. He stepped through it without hesitation, his resolve stronger than ever. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it, not just for himself, but for everyone else who had fallen victim to the Watcher's grip. Ethan stood before the Watcher, his body tense and his mind teetering on the edge of panic. The towering figure gestured with one shadowy arm, and the fog around them dissolved, revealing a vast labyrinth stretching endlessly in every direction. Its walls were made of shifting, translucent glass, each surface reflecting distorted fragments of Ethan's life. The images twisted into grotesque caricatures of his worst moments, showing his failures, regrets, and betrayals on a loop. "This maze," the Watcher intoned, "is your trial. At its center lies the key to your freedom or your undoing. But beware, for the maze knows you better than you know yourself. It will twist your reality and prey on your every fear." Before Ethan could respond, the ground beneath his feet shifted, and he was suddenly standing inside the labyrinth. The path behind him vanished, leaving him with only one direction to go. The air was suffocating, thick with a mix of decay and electricity. The first turn he took led him into a narrow corridor where the walls seemed to close in as he walked. He caught glimpses of himself in the glass, but these reflections stared back with hollow eyes and sneering smiles, whispering venomous thoughts into his ears. "You're a failure," one reflection hissed. "No one will miss you," another sneered. Ethan clenched his fists, forcing himself to move forward. Each step felt heavier, as though the labyrinth was draining his strength. He tried to focus, to remind himself that this was all an illusion, but the reflections began to change. Now they showed loved ones, his family, his friends, calling out for him, their faces contorted in anguish. The voices became deafening, and Ethan fell to his knees, clutching his head. "Why did you abandon us? You could have saved me." Tears streamed down his face as the guilt and sorrow threatened to consume him. But deep within, a flicker of resolve ignited. "This isn't real," he whispered, his voice trembling. "It's not real." He forced himself to stand, breathing deeply as he focused on the faint sound of his heartbeat. The reflections faded, and the corridor opened into a larger chamber. In the center of the room stood a figure, himself again, but this time not distorted or monstrous. This version of Ethan appeared weary, his shoulders slumped and his face lined with pain, but his eyes held a quiet strength. The two Ethans stared at each other in silence until the doppelganger spoke. "You can't escape this," it said. "You'll never be free, not unless you accept the truth." "What truth?" Ethan demanded. The figure pointed to the glass walls around them, and suddenly, they displayed scenes from Ethan's past, choices he had made, moments he had avoided. The memories were raw and unfiltered, exposing every mistake and every fear he had buried. He saw the time he betrayed a friend, the moment he gave up on a dream, and the nights he let fear dictate his actions. Ethan's chest tightened, but he didn't look away. Instead, he stepped closer to the doppelganger. "You're right," he said quietly. "I've made mistakes. I've failed. But those things don't define me. I can choose to be better." The doppelganger's expression softened, and for a moment, the room was silent. Then the figure dissolved into light, and a path opened before Ethan, leading to the heart of the labyrinth. As he stepped through, he felt the weight on his shoulders lighten slightly. The Watcher's voice echoed in the distance, colder now but still omnipresent. "Impressive, mortal. But the final trial awaits. Let's see if your resolve holds when faced with the ultimate fear." Ethan stood on the precipice of an abyss, his body trembling under the weight of exhaustion and fear. The Watcher loomed above him, a towering mass of shadow and malice, its burning eyes fixed on him. Surrounding them was a void, endless and vast, dotted with faint echoes of screams and whispers, as though the souls of the damned lingered in the air. "This is your final trial," the Watcher growled, its voice reverberating through Ethan's bones. "A battle not of strength, but of will. Step forward, and face the essence of your existence." Ethan hesitated, the ground beneath him rippling as if alive. A faint light appeared in the distance, beckoning him forward. He knew this wasn't just a test, it was a trap designed to exploit his deepest fears and weaknesses. But he had no choice. Steeling himself, he stepped into the abyss, the darkness swallowing him whole. He landed in a vast, circular chamber, its walls made of pulsating flesh and bone. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the floor felt alive, writhing beneath his feet. In the center of the chamber stood a mirror, tall and foreboding, its surface rippling like water. Ethan approached cautiously, his reflection staring back at him with an intensity that sent chills down his spine. The reflection stepped out of the mirror, no longer an image but a physical manifestation of himself. This version of Ethan was darker, his eyes hollow and his expression twisted with hatred. "You've been running your entire life," the doppelganger spat. "Running from responsibility, from fear, from yourself. You're weak." Ethan clenched his fists, his anger bubbling to the surface. "I'm not afraid of you," he said, though his voice trembled. The dark version of himself laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "You should be. I'm everything you've buried, everything you've denied. And now, I'm going to consume you." The chamber began to shift, the walls contracting as if the room itself was alive. The doppelganger lunged at Ethan, its movements unnaturally fast. Ethan dodged, barely avoiding the attack, and scrambled to his feet. The fight wasn't just physical, every blow the doppelganger landed was accompanied by a surge of memories, his failures, his regrets, his fears, all flooding his mind in vivid detail. "You can't win," the doppelganger hissed, its voice a chilling echo. "You're nothing without your fear. It's what defines you." Ethan gritted his teeth, his resolve hardening. "Fear doesn't define me," he said. "It's what makes me human. But I won't let it control me." Summoning every ounce of courage, Ethan faced the doppelganger head-on. He focused on the light within himself, the moments of strength, of love, of hope, and used them to push back against the darkness. The doppelganger screamed, its form beginning to dissolve into shadows. The Watcher's voice echoed through the chamber, furious and disbelieving. "Impossible. No mortal has ever defied me." Ethan turned to face the towering figure, his body battered but his spirit unbroken. "You feed on fear, but you've underestimated the strength it can give. I won't be your pawn anymore." The light within him grew brighter, engulfing the chamber and the Watcher. The shadows screamed, their forms unraveling as the nightmare realm began to collapse. Ethan felt himself being pulled back, the darkness receding as the light consumed everything. He woke up in his room, the first rays of dawn streaming through the window. The marks on his arms were gone, and for the first time in weeks, the air felt still. The video file of Necrosleep was no longer on his computer, as if it had never existed. But Ethan knew the truth, he had faced the nightmare realm and survived. Yet, deep down, he felt the faintest echo of the Watcher's voice. "You've won this time, mortal. But fear is eternal." Ethan stared into the eyes of the Watcher, their fiery glow piercing through his very soul. His defiance was met with a dark, rumbling laughter that reverberated throughout the realm. The fog thickened around them, suffocating and oppressive, as if the world itself conspired to crush his resolve. Yet, for the first time since entering this hellish dimension, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope. The memories of the forum post echoed in his mind. The instructions had hinted at one key truth: the Watcher's power was fueled by fear. To defeat it, Ethan needed to confront the one thing he had been avoiding, the source of his own terror. "Why do you fight so hard?" The Watcher's voice coiled around Ethan like a serpent. "You could end this suffering now. All you have to do is surrender." Ethan took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Surrendering means becoming like you, feeding on fear, enslaving others. I'd rather die than let that happen." The Watcher's form began to shift, growing taller, more grotesque. Its limbs twisted and multiplied, and its face became a swirling void of shadows. The ground beneath Ethan's feet cracked and splintered, sending shards of translucent material into the abyss below. The realm itself seemed to tremble with the Watcher's rage. "You think you can defy me?" it roared. "You are nothing without your fear." The world around Ethan shifted, pulling him into a kaleidoscope of memories. He saw himself as a child, paralyzed by nightmares of monsters under his bed. He saw moments of failure, of heartbreak, of loss. Each memory played out like a cruel theater, designed to break him. But as the memories unfolded, Ethan began to notice something. Amid the darkness, there were sparks of light, small, fleeting moments where he had overcome. He saw the time he stood up to a school bully, shaking but determined. He remembered the night he had stayed awake with his younger sister, calming her fears with stories of bravery. He saw himself pursuing his passions, despite the doubts that plagued him. Ethan clenched his fists. "You've shown me my fear, but you've forgotten one thing. Fear isn't just a weakness, it's a reminder that I'm alive. And as long as I'm alive, I can fight." The Watcher recoiled, its form flickering like a dying flame. The ground beneath Ethan stabilized, and the oppressive fog began to lift. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the shard of a broken mirror he had taken from the labyrinth. The shard shimmered with an inner light, a weapon forged from his own resolve. The Watcher lunged at him, its massive, clawed hand swiping through the air. Ethan dodged, rolling to the side, and drove the shard into the Watcher's chest. The creature screamed, a deafening sound that shook the realm to its core. Its form began to dissolve, shadows peeling away like smoke in the wind. "You cannot destroy me," the Watcher bellowed. "Fear is eternal." Ethan stood firm, his voice steady. "Maybe so, but it doesn't own me. Not anymore." The light from the shard intensified, engulfing the Watcher and spreading throughout the nightmare realm. The grotesque towers crumbled, the whispers faded, and the oppressive weight lifted from the air. The ground beneath Ethan's feet began to crack, not with darkness, but with blinding light. As the realm collapsed, Ethan felt himself being pulled upward, away from the crumbling chaos. The last thing he heard was the Watcher's fading voice, "This is not the end. Fear always finds a way." Ethan woke up in his room, the morning sun streaming through the window. His body ached, and the red marks on his arms had faded to faint scars. The file for Necrosleep was gone, as if it had never existed. For the first time in weeks, the air felt still, and the shadows in his room were just shadows. He stared at his reflection in the mirror, seeing not a broken man, but someone who had faced his fears and survived. Though the memory of the Watcher lingered, Ethan knew he had reclaimed his life. And no matter what came next, he was ready.